Hello, everybody. Welcome to our April research webinar. We are the Canadian Coalition for Homeopathy, and we have been putting on monthly research webinars for the past several months now. And we're very excited to have you join us for another wonderful presentation. And if you'd like to put in the chat where you are tuning in from, we are always very curious to know where our audience is based. And I'm just going to start by giving a brief introduction to the coalition, and then we will have Sharem introduce tonight's presentation and our panelists. So tonight's presentation, Homeopathy Research in Context, a video recording by Rachel Roberts, followed by a panel discussion with our esteemed panelists. A little bit about the coalition. You can find us at our website, homeopathycoalition.ca, where you can sign up for our newsletter so you can stay up to date about our future research webinars and other offerings. And the Canadian Coalition for Homeopathy launched in April of 2022. And the mission of the coalition is to bring together patient associations, homeopathic practitioners, researchers, and industry stakeholders who wish to promote homeopathy in Canada and preserve the freedom of choice in medicine. Our objectives are to educate the public on the many benefits of homeopathy, to debunk false information about homeopathy, which is one of the primary aims of this research webinar series, to dive into the research supporting the efficacy of homeopathy, and to defend and promote the access to homeopathic medicines in Canada. And as mentioned, we have already had several presentations in the research webinar series, and all of them are visible on our website, all of the previous presentations. And we have several more scheduled for the rest of the year. On May 7th, Ananda, who's also with us tonight, will be presenting on homeopathy and infectious diseases. In June, we have Richard Grosinger speaking of the basis of homeopathic microdoses. Our September presentation is to be announced. And in October, we have Christophe Merville speaking on the French study. And in December, we have Gerald Pollack speaking about the fourth phase of water. So many exciting presentations still to come. And this is just a quick thank you to Boiron, who have helped to make these webinars possible. And they have a new app for home users, home prescribers, and you can download it for free. And if you are a home user and home prescriber of homeopathic remedies, you can check out their app, and I'm sure you will find it very useful. It's very well organized and very informative. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Sharem, to introduce tonight's presentation.
Thank you very much, Victor. Hello, everyone. I'm really grateful to Dr. Stephen Malthouse, Ananda Moore, and Heather Cardona to accept to be here tonight with us as a panelist and to discuss this webinar that Rachel Roberts gave a year ago in Washington during the joint homeopathic conference. It was a 2-hour video. I was there. It's an amazing presentation. I was really impressed by the quality of the presentation. We had asked Rachel Roberts to have her live and do a presentation for us. She was supposed to actually do it in September, and for some reason she couldn't do it. And that's why we don't have a presenter for September. But she graciously agreed to have the video, the webinar that she presented last year in Washington, to be edited for tonight's presentation. So Rachel Roberts is one of the most famous researchers in the homeopathic community. She doesn't need too much introduction. She has started as a homeopath, and then she went into research. She has extensive experiences in research. She's part of the Homeopathic Research Institute. I really invite each one of you who are present today, and invite your friends and colleagues to go to Homeopathic Research Institute website and look at the amazing work that they're doing there. You have all the information on Rachel as well. So in order to not to take too much of your time, I will present the panelists at the end of the webinar. And we'll start the video right now. Please.
Thank you so much. So I am here to talk to you about the homeopathy debate. I'm hoping that by the end of this session, you'll have something more of an idea of how this debate has evolved over the years. We might feel like we've been having exactly the same conversation about the evidence base for many, many years, but in fact, there have been tangible shifts in the debate around whether there is or is not scientific evidence that homeopathy works. Now, just before we get into the nitty-gritty of that, for those of you who don't know me and don't know HRI, I just wanted to explain quickly who I'm representing today. So the Homeopathy Research Institute is a UK-based charity dedicated to promoting high-quality research in homeopathy at an international level. And there's basically two branches to the work we do. One half of our work is all about generating new high-quality research in this field, and the other half of our activities are dedicating to communicating the existing evidence base, whether that's simply us providing accurate data, or, as is often the case, we are out there correcting misinformation about the evidence. Working. So if we start at the beginning, the homeopathy debate really got going in around 2008 in the UK. The UK was the first target. We took the brunt of it for the first few years, all on our own on our little island. And basically it amounted to one side saying there's no evidence whatsoever that it works. You're selling placebos, you're conning people, it's all impossible. And then the homeopathic community was saying, actually, there are thousands of studies. We have tons of evidence. I heard these phrases. It's so obvious that it works. In fact, at HRI, we take the position that's rather more boringly in the middle between those two polarized positions. So the charity got charitable status in the UK in 2009. So that's when we consider that HRI was born. And the position we took from the beginning was that there is high quality evidence showing it works. The existing data is not consistent with homeopathy being a placebo effect, but more research is needed if we're going to fully understand it and fully inform everybody. So what I wanted to share with you next is just a handful of examples of the kind of studies we use to back up that claim. When we're saying to people there is high quality evidence, what examples do we use? And I'm asked quite a lot about how we pick the studies we talk about at HRI, because we deliberately only hand select a few studies that we talk about repeatedly. And that's because we focus on quality, not quantity. And when I'm especially taking on new people at HRI and trying to explain what we're looking for, I came up with this idea of talking about it as research without compromise. So they're high quality studies in terms of the science, but they're also high quality studies in terms of the homeopathy that's being delivered during the studies. So the first example is one that tells us about how homeopathy works under the most normal conditions possible without interfering at all with what's going on. So this is an observational study conducted in France. It was published in 2022, so it's quite recent. And what they did here was they accessed the national healthcare databases that covered the whole of France, and they were able to look at the prescriptions given to almost all women who had been diagnosed with non-metastatic breast cancer who were going for mastectomy over a certain time period. Amounted to 98,000 patients. As far as I'm aware, this is the biggest study we have to date. They followed these women from diagnosis up to surgery, and then for the 5 years post-surgery. What they found is that by... Ooh. Doesn't work. Help, help, help. I knew that was going to happen. I have no patience whatsoever. Okay, so they divided them up into 3 groups. There was the women who had no homeopathy, the women who had 1 or 2 prescriptions, and another group where they had 3 or more homeopathic medicines. And they basically assessed the impact of the homeopathic treatment on the quality of life of these women undergoing cancer care. And they were measuring the quality of life by measuring how many conventional drugs needed to be prescribed to manage their side effects. what they found was that the group that used 3 or more homeopathic medicines in the 6 months before their surgery, compared to having no homeopathy whatsoever, there was a 12% reduction in the conventional drugs that had to be dispensed to them for dealing with the physical side effects. So this is your classic anti-nausea drugs, anti-diarrhea drugs, and so on. Now, quite surprising, I think, to everybody here, they didn't actually find any difference in prescriptions for psychological problems, which was a surprise, but this is the nature of research. It doesn't always find what you expect it to find. But they did find overall that homeopathy was associated with reduced cost of conventional drugs and reduced hospital costs. The second example is very famous, and many of you will know this one, also done in France, because that's where homeopathy has been so well established for so long. We call it the EPI3 study in the UK, done by an extremely high caliber team some years ago. This was following 8,500 patients just under their routine normal care by general practitioners, over 800 doctors involved. There were 3 treatment groups. We had patients who were suffering from upper respiratory tract infections, musculoskeletal disorders, and sleep, anxiety, and depressive disorders. What they found was that the patients who were treated by the GPs trained in homeopathy had the same clinical outcomes, sometimes better actually, but we understate it. They had the same clinical outcomes as patients using conventional medicine alone, but they had reduced use of conventional drugs. And when you look at the conditions we're talking about here, the kind of drugs that we could use less of are really important ones. This is painkillers, benzodiazepines, antibiotics. These are all drugs we want to minimize. And by using homeopathy, they were able to use fewer of those drugs. The next example is kind of going up one level in terms of scientific rigor. So you might have heard about the evidence base, the evidence hierarchy, And if we start at the bottom with the studies we've been talking about already, where we just observe people and we really try not to interfere, the next step up is called a pragmatic randomized controlled trial. Now, the crucial point here is that as soon as you see the word randomized, you know you can start talking about cause and effect. So that's a really big difference from the studies we talked about before. Before it was a correlation, you can see a pattern, but you don't know for sure that A is causing B. Now it's randomized, we can say definitely if we get a good outcome here, this is definitely linked to the homeopathic treatment. So this was a study done by Peter Vixby, who was actually a trustee of HRI for many, many years, and we funded this one, so slightly declaring the bias here, but it is a really excellent study. He was looking at adults with self-reported depression, randomized the patients into 2 groups. One had usual care, and by that we mean conventional medical care. The other group had usual care plus additional individualized homeopathy. And what's beautiful about this is, like I said, it's a rigorous randomized controlled trial, but no interference with the homeopathy, just seeing your prescriber working in the usual way. He used the standard questionnaire you would always use when you're doing any kind of depression study, and he found a moderate effect size. Now, that is very, very good in research terms. Moderate is actually very good, and the results were maintained for a year after treatment. One more example of a single study is from the Ukraine. And we love this one for slightly different reasons. It's the gold standard, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial, so top of the hierarchy for an individual study, but it's multi-centered now. So when you have multiple clinics involved, that adds a little bit more strength to it again. And in this occasion, we're looking at an over-the-counter homeopathic preparation. So this is a product called Synfrontal. You might call it a complex remedy or a combination remedy. In this case, we have 3 different remedies for sinusitis combined, and the patients were randomized to receive Synfrontal or placebo. The standard questionnaire was used that you'd use in conventional research, looking at a change in the severity of the symptoms from day 0 of the trial to day 7. And it was fantastic to see that the homeopathic group did better than the placebo group. For those of you that are interested in p-values, whenever you see this in a research study, this is telling you how likely it would have been that you got this result by chance. And as long as that number is less than 0.05, we would consider it, if you like, a genuine result, that the odds of it being due to chance are sufficiently small that we're interested in this trial. So you can see there, that is a lot less than 0.05. When you're getting to 0.0001, it's extremely impressive. So one last type of study to talk about is the very, very top of the evidence hierarchy, the top of this pyramid. People talk about systematic reviews and meta-analysis as being the strongest evidence you can have for a treatment. Bless you. What you do in a systematic review is you take all the individual studies on a given topic, you assess them together, analyze them together, and that gives you the strongest possible conclusions. The most famous example we have of this kind of study was done in 2014 by Dr. Robert Matthey. He's a fantastic researcher and a good personal friend. He published this work in the most famous journal for this type of study, just called Systematic Review. So that's very rare in homeopathy to get into the top journals. He looked at these 22 trials comparing individualized homeopathy against placebo. He did it with the strictest possible methods, and he found that homeopathic medicines, when prescribed during individualized treatment, are 1.5 to 2 times more likely to have an effect than placebo. So this is the study that has enabled the sector to say data from these trials, from the best trials, is just not consistent with the idea that homeopathy is a placebo effect. But it's important, I think, to remember that, especially at HRI, when we're saying there is evidence homeopathy works, we are not just talking about clinical trials in humans. It's very important, I think, to tell people or remind people that our medicines work in plants and other species. The most famous plant experiment ever done was done in 2010 by a Swiss team headed up by Professor Steven Baumgartner. And what they did was take duckweed, which are these really, really tiny floating plants that float on ponds. They put them on Petri dishes. They floated on these Petri dishes and they poisoned them with arsenic. Not enough to kill them, just enough to stress them so that they were sick. They then randomized them into 2 groups, and they gave one group arsenicum, the homeopathic medicine, and the other group water as a sort of placebo control. And as you would hope, what we saw is that the homeopathic arsenicum treated the sick plants and made them healthier, and that was detected because the growth rate improved in the homeopathic group, but not in the control group. Now, again, any of you who know Stefan Baumgartner, he's the most rigorous researcher you will ever meet. It's done with Swiss precision. It's absolutely perfectly done. So the design is perfect, the stats are perfect. There is absolutely no way this could be a false positive result. Until not long ago, the only criticism you could make of this study is that it hadn't been replicated. So in 2022, he got another team together and replicated it again. Same university, so you can't say it's totally independent replication, but it's definitely a strong next step to making this even more convincing. Now, there's been a lot of talk recently. Yes?
Should the replication not be by another team to fit the scientific criteria?
Absolutely, ideally, yeah. So it counts as a replication, but not an independent replication, correct? So agrohomeopathy is kind of the talk of the town in the research world at the moment, as many of you know. It's an emerging field where we've got some very exciting new researchers doing exciting work. And it does surprise a lot of people to know that we are literally testing the same homeopathic medicines we use in people on crops. We had the last HRI conference last June, and one of the stars of the show turned out to be Leo, Dr. Leo Fido from Brazil, who just became known as the strawberry guy. He was presenting his PhD study where he had been giving homeopathic medicines to strawberry crops in a greenhouse. And again, done exactly like a clinical trial, randomized, blinded, meaning he didn't even know which strawberries were getting the medicine and which were getting the fake. And he detected positive biostimulatory impact of the remedies on these greenhouse-grown strawberries. And he was seeing increased plant vitality, fruit production, but crucially, increased resistance to disease. That is the most exciting part, because the ultimate aim of agrohomeopathy is to see whether homeopathic medicines can replace or at least reduce the use of toxic pesticides, which, as we all know, is extremely important. I didn't have any idea how contaminated strawberries were until I heard Leo's talk, and I eat them all the time. You know how you should wash fruit, but you're lazy and sometimes you don't, or is that just me? Yeah, I feel the judgment. I can feel it. Certainly at the office, Chris and I, you'll see his slide later, we work together on a daily basis at the HRI office, and we bring berries in and we bring snacks in, and we're both lazy about washing them. After we saw Leo's presentation at the conference, we've been washing the hell out of those ever since. So the other star of our conference turned out to be Antonio Lopez Carvalho from Mexico. He was one of our keynote speakers who introduced everybody to the world of aqua homeopathy, which was new for most people. Even the researchers there didn't know about this stuff. Now, this amazing team has been working on various species that are held in fish farms in Mexico, and it's kind of distressing. Again, I didn't know how awful fish farming was until I heard Antonio's presentation and how all of these species are suffering, basically. And so they're looking for alternatives to make the species healthier and clean up the food chain. So they've started seeing what homeopathy can do under these conditions. And what he found was that the homeopathic medicines used on these aquatic species was reducing their stress. That meant that they had fewer bacterial infections, fewer parasitic diseases, and he's seeing this in oysters, scallops, snapperfish, and others. And we've got a lovely interview online somewhere with Antonio. He goes, "How is this placebo? It's an oyster," and it's really hard to argue with that. So we love his work. And again, the ultimate aim of this is to replace the antibiotics and the antiparasitic drugs that are currently being chucked at these species, get into the species and get into us. So if I'm saying there's all this good work and this is just a sample of it, I often get the question, why is there still a debate? Why is it that I can show people these studies and they still don't believe it? And there's really two things going on here. The first is called plausibility bias. So that's me on the right having a particularly bad day. It's because it does feel like sometimes we're banging our head against a brick wall. We're looking at this data, we're saying, clearly this is enough. This is good science, there's nothing wrong with it, here it is. The people on the other side of this debate cannot see that because it is ingrained in them for so long that this is literally impossible, that they just say back, there must be something wrong with it. We hear this all the time. There must be a problem with the study. There isn't. They must have done it wrong. They didn't. It's really just like this banging your head. So that's part of the problem, purely plausibility bias. But the other issue is misinformation. And that's where things really changed in 2015. Up until 2015, it was, you have no evidence. Suddenly, everyone was saying, homeopathy definitely does not work for anything. Research has proved now it's definitely only placebo. So things got drastically worse, to be honest, in 2015. And as some of you here will well know, this was entirely due to a single report published by an Australian government research institute called NHMRC. And this is what they put out in their press release to the world media. They said they had found no reliable evidence it worked, and they even went as far as saying no good quality studies were positive. I put their exact wording so that I don't get sued, but that's basically what they said. We do not have a single good study, which obviously is not true. They also said that this was based on a rigorous assessment of more than 1,800 papers. So when you put out a press release saying that, you can absolutely imagine what happened. It spread right around the world, terrible headlines, including here in the US, where they say 1,800 studies later, we conclude it doesn't work. Thankfully, the homeopathy sector was not prepared to take this one lying down. Several of us just said enough is enough. This is so extreme. It had kind of been coming on for a few years. The other side were getting more and more audacious, and they were just kind of doing things. We thought, you can't do this. And this happened. I remember saying, enough. This is so bad and so wrong. We have to do something about it. So when we dug into this report, it became clear pretty quickly how they'd done what they did. The key word is that they said there was no reliable evidence. So as soon as you see that, okay, what is reliable? Well, reliable means it's good quality, well designed, has enough people in it for a meaningful result. So that all sounds absolutely fine until we dug into it even further and realized that what they meant by that was that for a trial to be reliable, it had to have a minimum of 150 people in it, and it had to have a perfect quality score on the rating scale used at the time, this is a long time ago, of 5 out of 5. Now, this minimum 150, completely made up out of thin air, never used before or since in any study. And the 5 out of 5, again, we've never seen it before or since. Usually anything 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5, it's considered acceptable. So when you look at what this did to the data, the first thing is they didn't look at 1,800 studies, they looked at 176. Now I must stress that's correct, that's normal. It was just a stupid PR person who put the 1,800 number in the press release. It's a number that should never have been released. The 176 was a reasonable starting point. However, when you then say we're not interested in anything with less than 150 people in it, it drops to 30 trials. And then if you say we're only going to consider perfect quality score trials, that drops it to 5 trials. As those 5 trials happen to be negative, of course, some will be negative, that is exactly how they were able to say there is no reliable evidence homeopathy works. So pretty shocking. And the sector's response was to make a complaint in 2016 to the Commonwealth Ombudsman. So this was possible to challenge this legally only because NHMRC is an Australian government-funded research institute. So that meant this was paid for by taxpayers' dollars, and that meant you could hold them to account for misuse of funds. So basically, the Australian Homeopathic Association got hold of us and said, would we help them? Would we do the science, do the deconstruction of the science for this complaint to try to hold them to account for scientific misconduct, which is extremely serious? And it was amazing to see how the whole homeopathic world got behind this. When we asked, it was really moving. You'll recognize some logos, I'm sure, people who hosted screenings of the Just One Drop documentary where this was highlighted, Your Health, Your Choice, where people signed petitions and so on. It really was a worldwide effort. But as this story is drawing to a close, I wanted just once to show a picture of the most important people behind this, and that's Jerry Dendrinos, who is from the AHA. This was entirely his idea. He was the one that filed the complaint. He's taken most of the heat on this. We obviously work with him. And then Teresa Nicoletti is the lawyer who has worked on this case. She's one of the best lawyers in Australia, an amazing woman. The only thing I don't like about Teresa is she told me it was going to take 6 months to a year. Because I said, what am I signing up for here? How big is this? I know we're taking on the Australian government, but she said, no more than a year, Rachel. Turned out to be 7 years this case went on. So still consider a close friend, but has to be said. So it finally ended August last year after this 7 years of non-stop work. And it made me laugh. People said, oh, have you not heard the result yet? Like we sent it off in 2016 and waited for it. It has not been like that. It's been an interactive process non-stop for 7 years. You can imagine it was not a good day at the office when we got this result from the Commonwealth Ombudsman that they actually put on Twitter, which is unprecedented. They don't normally say anything ever publicly about their investigations, but would put so much heat on this. They actually put it on Twitter and they said it was not possible to get an independent scientific expert to pass judgment on the evidence. So it was basically a non-verdict after 7 years. We did not hold them to account. On the other hand, they didn't win either because they were not exonerated, whatever you might see their PR department saying. It was a bit of a stalemate and a non-verdict. Now, you can imagine that the homeopathy sector has kicked off quite a lot about this, and it was quite difficult because there's not much I can say publicly. But lots of people were saying, oh, this is, can you say bullshit, or is that too rude? That's okay. Total bullshit. Of course, they could have found an expert. This is, you know. So I have to say, I have to actually stick up for the Ombudsman on this one. So Jerry, Teresa, and I had teleconferences with the lead investigator every month in the middle of the night for me, because it's in Australia. And we were really that close to the investigation. And we reached the point where they tried to get the independent expert. They asked us to put names forward. We put 10 names. NHMRC put forward 10 names. They were sent across to the other camp. We did a deep dive on every single person and said no, because we found they were funded by NHMRC or they'd co-authored with the people we know did this and so on. So we rejected all their names. They rejected all our names. And I promise you, we tried to think of people not connected to us and everything, but it didn't work. So then the investigator went off herself and tried 3 different people. They all said no. So they really, really did try. And I think what this really reminds us of is how hot a topic this is. It is actually extremely hard to find somebody at the highest level that you'd need to pass judgment on this, who is truly without a preconceived opinion on one side or the other, and who is willing to put their head above the parapet and say that NHMRC got it wrong or not. Nobody wanted to touch this. So, you know, very, very frustrating, but it was, you know, this is true. It was not a lie or an excuse. So when you see 7 years of your life that you can't get back, ending in a non-verdict, of course, we had to take a look at whether this had been the right decision or not from the outset. And I think we do have to remember that there have been some tangible outcomes from this effort. The first, there's no slide for it, but the first is actually it brought the sector together in a way I've never seen before. The level of collaboration we've had internationally since this happened was unprecedented. I still see the benefits of that today. But more importantly, we had a couple of wins along the way, which are very important. Some of you will know that one of the things Jerry found out right at the beginning when he looked into this is that there was actually an earlier version of this famous report that they did and they buried and they never published it. It was done by Professor Karen Grimmer, wonderful woman, and she found encouraging evidence for 5 conditions. So this was a pretty positive result for homeopathy, and it just got buried. So when Jerry discovered this through looking at meeting minutes and got hold of me and said, you won't believe this, the one we're looking at isn't the original report. We set about trying to get that first report released. And it took years, but thank you to everybody who signed the petition. We got 75,000 signatures from all over the world. And eventually in 2019, they were forced to release it, which I think is pretty impressive of the sector to get a document released into the public domain that was never supposed to see the light of day. Oh, thank you. And the second results, if you remember nothing else I say today because it's the afternoon and it's cold and whatever, please remember that we got this result. Those headlines that said, this report proves homeopathy doesn't work. At the same time as the first report was released, the CEO of NHMRC went on the record and said, contrary to some claims, the review did not conclude that homeopathy was ineffective. So considering this report is used to this day to claim that, if you ever see it anywhere or ever see anyone saying it doesn't work because of this report, it's the CEO herself has said that is not what they concluded. So happily moving on from that whole debacle, I do think I have to always do the honourable thing and declare the true limitations of our data. There are problems with our data, like everybody else's. So the main problems, particularly with clinical research in homeopathy at the moment, is that we do have a relatively small number of studies compared with conventional medicine. Dr. Robert Matthey estimates that we have 271 of these randomized controlled trials, which sounds quite good until you realize that unfortunately, they cover 144 different medical conditions. That's our key problem. Our evidence base is far too scattered. It means that we have roughly 1.8 trials on average per medical condition. And people almost always want to talk about the evidence per condition. So this is a real problem for us. On top of that, we have further problems. You think about all the different types of homeopathy and all the different treatments. We have scattering there as well. And then unfortunately, purely due to lack of funds, most of our studies are quite small. And it's a fact of life that the more people there are in your study, the stronger the result tends to be and the more people pay attention. And then as we touched on earlier, we have a real problem with lack of replications. However good a single study is, it will have limited impact if somebody else doesn't replicate it. So all of this combined means that when you do those systematic reviews where you gather them all up for one condition and analyze them together, it comes through that we have weak evidence for homeopathy. For those of you that know a bit about the research world already, I thought you'd be interested in Katharina Gertner's work. This German researcher has done a huge amount of work in the last few years mapping the evidence. So she's taken a broader view than Robert Matthey, which is why her numbers are so much higher. She's looked at all the clinical trials right down to master's theses, conference presentations and so on, so right down to the very bottom of the heap, which is why there's more of them. But even with her bigger numbers, we only get to 2.8 trials per condition, so the problem remains unchanged. So the first thing it tells us is that future research needs to focus. I've been saying this for about 10 years, and I think it's finally getting through. We are seeing people being far more strategic about which study we do next. Not just, oh, I really fancy knowing if it works for this. Could we please pick an area and stick to it and all start to collaborate and do similar studies on the same topics? And of course, we want them to inform clinical decision-making, especially where conventional medicine doesn't have all the answers. And also, we want to have more money and resources allocated so we can do these larger studies. So the road ahead is clear in what needs to be done in some ways. It's just making it happen. But to be really, really fair, having said we have this problem, I think it's very important to say that conventional medicine faces similar challenges. And I think this is something that most people are unaware of. Now, there was a study that looked at this. Cochrane reviews are the highest quality type of those systematic reviews. They're very, very prestigious and well respected. And what Cochrane says is usually what people believe. So looking at these reviews by condition of conventional medicine, they found that in 39% of them, they only identify between 1 and 5 individual clinical trials per condition. So if I'm saying we have an average of 1.8 to 2.8, at least that puts us slap bang in the middle of that range. So if anyone ever says to me again, which is likely to happen, well, you hardly have any trials per condition, I'd say, you're right, we don't have many. We're the same as 40% of conventional medical treatments. I was actually more shocked by the next number. When this study found that only 6% of those randomized controlled trials on conventional drugs were high quality, that I was absolutely amazed. I thought it'd be much higher than that. So again, when people say to me, well, homeopathy trials are poor quality, I was like, well, first of all, prove it. Show me where you're getting that from. And secondly, I wonder if we're any different from conventional medicine. 6% of their trials are high quality, the rest are not. So what this tells us that many conventional medical treatments have weak evidence too. And specifically, what this means is they come through grade analysis as having a low level of evidence, which might mean absolutely nothing to half the people in this room. So I wanted to talk very briefly about grade analysis. It's the kind of thing, was a film called We Need to Talk About Kevin. I feel a bit like that grade is something that researchers know about that we haven't been talking about publicly because it's a kind of annoying and complicated and convoluted, but grade analysis is a tool that was invented by researchers for researchers to help them take a group of studies on one condition and synthesize them to get an outcome, to tell people whether to recommend treatments or not, to basically inform clinical guidelines. And they wanted to make it structured so that everybody did it the same way, everyone could follow the same route to the answer. Now, this was supposed to be for the single drug, testing the same primary outcome, like a cough. And if you do it like that, you will get a nice cohesive answer that generates what they call a level of confidence. And it's basically saying, how good is this set of studies? How reliable is it? How likely is it that what we're finding here is true? So if it says it works or it doesn't work, how likely is that to be correct? Now, there's lots of things that they will factor into this grade analysis, but it's quality, it's how similar are the studies, have we got all positive or some positive, some negative, all these different things, including the number of people in each study. So when you've put all of that together and you're reaching your result of high, moderate, low, or very low level of confidence or level of evidence, can you see, I hope from what we've said already, where homeopathy is going to fall down? We fall down mostly in this, what they call heterogeneity, basically too many different studies, they're not similar enough on one condition, and the sample size, the number of patients in the studies. We need either one study or a group of studies to go over 400 to really come through this process well. And we know that most of ours are small and we miss that measure. So to give you a sort of real world example, I picked the allergic rhinitis evidence base because I had it already from 2015. This was in the Ombudsman submission that we sent them. It's our biggest evidence base per condition. We had then 15 trials. There might be a few more now, but it won't have changed much. So we had 15 trials. That's really good for us, but 9 different types of homeopathic treatment in here. So that's how it suddenly becomes a really mixed bag again. And that's where the problems come in. This diagram is only the isopathic. So this is a branch of homeopathy where you use the causative agent as the pill. So if you've got a dust allergy, you make dust mites into a homeopathic remedy, or pollen for hay fever, and so on. And even in that set of 8 studies, can you see we have mixed results? Positive, negative, inconclusive. And then we have all those different types of homeopathy. Some of them are single remedies, some of them are complex remedies, they're different. It's actually, frankly, a mess. So as well as that, we have normal homeopathy trials on allergic rhinitis, classical homeopathy, single remedies, complexes, and so it goes on. So this is why we are coming through grade analysis so badly. Just for those of you who know research, again, you might think the obvious other topic to think about is diarrhea in children. This is the other end of the spectrum. This is probably our cleanest, best evidence for a single condition, because even though it's only 3 clinical trials, Jennifer Jacobs did a brilliant job. She is a friend, but not saying it because of that. She really did do it textbook well. So she started with a pilot study, which got a positive trend. So the homeopathy did better than placebo, but it was a small trial, as you'd expect with a pilot study. So it wasn't statistically significant. So she then repeated it again with 90 people, and then again with 126 people. And what she saw with these children was unambiguously positive results, with homeopathy working better than placebo, done in high quality clinical trials. She then did the final step that you're meant to do. She combined those, as we discussed before, in a meta-analysis, merging them together and analyzing them again, and found that she did have this beautiful result where individualized homeopathic prescribing was reducing the duration of the diarrhea. So if you put this through grade, what happens? Sadly, it's still low. It's not very low, but it's low, which is really frustrating, because I really hope this would come through at least as moderate, but it's all because the total number of patients is 252, not 400 or more, as well as a few issues with quality, which is purely because there was a pilot study in there. So if you think this is arguably our strongest data for a single condition, and this is coming through as low, getting to the point where I'm thinking maybe the issue is grade, not data. So controversial, I know, but it got me thinking. So over the last year, I started talking to people at HRI about going, hang on, maybe we need to think about not why we're failing grade analysis, but what's happening in conventional medicine with grade. Maybe the problem really is grade. So we started looking at this, and somebody has looked at this for conventional medical research, again with these Cochrane reviews. And as you can see, what they found is that only 13.5% of reviews looking at conventional drugs would they say that the body of evidence is high quality, and that's regardless of the results. So it might say it doesn't work. We're just talking about, are the trials good? And it's only 13% that have a high quality body of evidence. So if you then look at, okay, the body of evidence is good, this set of trials, and it's positive, suggesting the treatment works, and it's statistically significant. So we're thinking of actually recommending it to patients now. That's only 4% of conventional medical treatments fully pass grade in this way. So their conclusion was that evidence that's high quality is uncommon. Favorable evidence of high quality is even more uncommon. How I would sum it up is that only 4% of conventional treatments have high quality evidence showing they work. So I think that would be a surprise to most people. I think there is a myth out there that conventional medicine is all tried and tested, it's evidence-based, we know exactly how well it works or not, and it just isn't true. Now, bearing in mind, though, that this was data from 2013 to 14, so it's quite old. So I was delighted when I woke up one morning to this headline in 2022. We don't know whether most medical treatments work, and we know even less about whether they cause harm. I was like, oh, finally, somebody is saying what we've known for all this time. And it's quite nice that they're on the front page for change and not us, if I'm honest. So this is a much more recent study doing very much the same thing. They looked at 1,500 different treatments and found that 95% of them do not have high quality evidence to support their benefits. So actually, I know it's the other way around, but remarkably consistent to say only 5% do when the previous study said 4%. So it's always encouraging when you get consistency as well. So the headline really from this paper is that more than 9 in 10 healthcare interventions are not supported by high quality evidence and the harms are underreported. So I do feel that when we are in discussions with decision makers around homeopathy and how much evidence we really have, this needs to be talked about a lot more. So another aspect of the homeopathy debate is a little bit different. This is where both sides are agreeing with each other, but HRI disagrees with both of them. So we have anti-homeopathy people saying we don't need any more research because we know it doesn't work. Ben Goldacre is a famous skeptic from the UK who said this back in 2011. Luckily, none of us listened to him and we carried on researching. But you also get people inside the homeopathy sector who say we don't need any more research because we know it works. HRI, we think differently. We do think there's a lot more we need to know and a lot more we need to demonstrate. So that's why we're very happy to fund as many studies as we can. We're a small charity, but we fund what we can. Some of you know Dr. Alexander Tournier. He's the founding director of HRI. He has moved all over the place since HRI began in 2009, from London to France to Germany, and he is now where I believe he needs to be, which is at the University of Bern in Switzerland, working directly with Stefan Baumgartner, the plant guy. So he's in the lab there every day now in Bern. And what's exciting about this is the University of Bern is the last remaining university in Europe that has a department of homeopathy in their faculty of medicine. So this is like this rare, precious set of people here at EKIM, it's called. And Stefan's in charge of it. Alex has joined. He now has PhD students and so on. So they're growing this set of researchers again and really trying to build on this. We are funding just one of Alex's studies. Some of you will know the famous basophil experiments. These are the white blood cells that release histamine when you have an allergic reaction. They were used in the 80s to do experiments where they showed that homeopathic histamine can inhibit this release of actual histamine. And what they're trying to do is rebuild this now with modern techniques, because it's very famous, but it was done so long ago. They want to see if they can do it again with the best techniques and build from there. Also, we all know the importance of data collection. It can't be said often enough. People have said it for years. We want to keep saying it until every homeopath contributes to data collection. So HRI has put a lot of support into the Clifical project via Alex's time, working with Robert and Yvonne. And they did this Clifical COVID-19 project where they really looked at the treatment of patients for COVID symptoms, of course, in addition to usual conventional care. And what they saw in their data, and I have to confess, the data is just beyond me. I had to help write a 2-page article about this with Alex. I'm like, no, explain that to me again. Sorry, I don't do stats, don't do maths, but there's this beautiful graph with these data points, and you can see these 2 clusters, and these 2 clusters were all different patients and their symptoms. And what it turned out to be is that when you looked at who they were in these 2 patches, one of them was all Gelsemium people, and one of them was all Bryonia people. So they had literally found empirical evidence for one of the key concepts in homeopathy for the first time. We could say those people actually had a symptom picture, and so did they, and we could recognize it and we could match it. They also saw all the differences in the way that COVID was treated in different countries coming through, and learned an awful lot about how we can do more data collection in future. We are also funding clinical research. We were very lucky a couple of years ago that Dr. Esther van der Werf, Dutch researcher, joined HRI full-time. And she comes from a fantastic background of about 20 years in epidemiology, looking at complementary medicine as an alternative to antibiotics, and also for women's health. So since she joined us, we've been activating her on various projects, and we started with a systematic review of the existing evidence for homeopathy in acute otitis media for ear infections, because we know that's something we all do every day. And that was a lovely collaboration with the University of Bristol, very prestigious university in the UK, as well as colleagues around the world. What it did was formally clarify what we knew we'd find, which is this mixed data, but it also gave us the platform from which to progress to the next step, which is a core outcome set. What Esther is doing is a formal process where you get input from prescribers, patients, parents, and researchers to all agree in future, what should we measure when we're doing a trial on ear infections? What symptom do you care about most? Is it the ear pain? Is it the fever? Is it the loss of sleep of the child? What is it? Is it the use of antibiotics? And if we can get everybody to agree on that and then publish this core outcome set, the idea is that in future, more and more researchers will all do their trials the same way. And that is how we stop having these mixed data sets. That's how we make it more similar and we start to come through grade analysis a lot better. The other way that we generate new research at HRI and support that is through our conferences. We've been doing international research conferences since 2013. Usually every 2 years, we find somewhere we really want to go. It's really nice and hot and sunny. I think if I'm going to work this hard, I want to enjoy it. So we did Barcelona, Rome, Malta. That was classic. Then we had to come home boringly because 2019 was 10 years of HRI and I got convinced by everybody that we had to do it in London. Thankfully, it was fantastic. We all had a really good time. And then the plan was to head off around Europe again. But I think you might have noticed there was a pandemic thing that happened. So none of us went anywhere. We had to skip our next conference and we took a time out until 2023. And actually we decided to do it in London again, purely because of the logistics during the pandemic of trying to organize an overseas conference was just too tricky. We really did not know how that was going to be. It was quite weird because when you've done them every 2 years for quite a long time, you know, you kind of get into a groove and we knew what we were doing and we knew exactly who to expect and how to do it. And we were all a bit rusty, first of all, which was quite fun. Like, how do we do this again? And then we really didn't know whether people would want live events in the same way as they had done before the shutdown. So we were very cautious in our approach. We planned for only 200 delegates, whereas we'd had 330 the time before, but we thought, let's just keep it small. We got 230 delegates, which was great. And more importantly for me, from 27 countries, that's spot on for what we were used to. It's usually that level of international contributions. The quality was as high as ever. The wine was as good as ever. The food was as good as ever. The partying was superb. So yeah, it was really, really great to see everybody come together again after 4 years, and nothing had changed in the best possible way. If you missed it, everything's available online free of charge. We never charge for our content. So we've got all the filmed presentations, the abstracts, and the conference proceedings. Now, very unusually, I'm going to mention something I wrote. Normally I promote everybody else, but Angelina and I always do an editorial as part of the conference proceedings every time. But this time we just suddenly realized it was 10 years we've been doing these conferences. So we decided to take a step back and really reflect on it. And it's quite interesting what we could see about how the whole homeopathy research sector had evolved over that 10 years. You could look at each event and see a different feel and a different energy and different types of work going on and so on. So we put just a short editorial together on that, but it is quite a useful document. So that's on the homepage of the website right now because it's quite a recent publication. And what I think it's useful for is if anyone still doesn't think there's any research, rather than just giving them a study, this really reminds people that we're a sector, that we have an entire homeopathic research community worldwide that has been generating good quality work for over 10 years. So it's useful for that. And also anyone who knows about the Sigurdsson et al. Paper with the null field effect challenge, if it means anything to you, we embedded a response to that hidden in the middle of this so that you can use it as a published article to defend yourself against that one if you need it. So everything on the HRI website is there because we think it will help somebody, whether it's practitioners or the public or other researchers, with any aspect of this debate. But the most important resource to know about is the homeopathy FAQs, because they were written back in 2014 originally, specifically to give people exact answers to some of these criticisms of homeopathy. So being done in 2014, some of them are looking a bit embarrassingly rubbish. If I look at them, I cringe. A lot of them have been updated regularly over the years, but you can see the problem we have is that they're in 12 languages now. So whenever I say to Chris Connolly, the comms manager, could I just change this? He looks at me like there is no just changing anything in an FAQ, Rachel, because it means 12 translations have to be done. I can't just tinker with them. So we have to approach this very carefully. So I had to take a deep breath and delay the full updating of these, which we've got planned, a little bit longer, because instead what we did in March was we wrote 2 new FAQs that were missing. We did one on the safety of homeopathy, And that basically has it in very simple language to tell you that there's 12 main studies, 11 of them say it's safe, and the other one's by Edzard Ernst. So that will explain why that's the anomaly. And the cost effectiveness data is all there. So lucky that Professor Ostermann from Germany has just done a brilliant systematic review on cost effectiveness that he presented at the June conference. So that enabled us to write an FAQ for the first time about cost effectiveness. So I'm aware I've thrown a lot of information at you today, so I wanted to just make sure that I tell you where you can find it after I've shut up and we've all gone and had wine. The most obvious way to keep informed is to sign up to the HRI mailing list, which is on our homepage, and you will then receive our quarterly newsletter. I can promise you we are incredibly careful with that mailing list. I hate getting too many emails, so I don't send many emails. You'll get this quarterly newsletter and really perhaps one or two other things per year. Now, just to point out one thing on here, which is these little links down on the right-hand side. It took me a while before I realized that people didn't realize what they were. So yes, it's recommended reading. Yes, these are articles we think are good, but what actually goes into that is quite a big operation. So what it means is that 4 times a year, somebody at HRI, or these days more than one person, goes through every single homeopathy research paper that has been published since the last time, every quarter, everyone we can find, and curates that evidence base. And we look through to see what is good, what is bad, which is mediocre, what's interesting. And from that, we pick 2 or 3 studies that we think everybody would like to know about. So that's what recommended reading is. There's a lot that goes into that selection. If you've missed them previously, it's not a problem. They are hosted forever on our website. If you go to the resources section, you will see recommended reading there. And just before I forget, I would say if you're looking for anything on our website, it is huge. If there isn't an obvious click through from the homepage from one of the banners, just go straight to the green bit. If you go to resources, that whole bright green section is where almost everything is. And as you run down that left-hand column, hopefully you'll be able to find what you're looking for. Another section there is HRI publications. So this is everything we're writing and generating, whether it's peer-reviewed articles or whether it's articles we've written for other people to use. The most obvious example of that is our research and focus articles, we call RIFs for short. And these are probably the most important. Someone said, oh, you can tell how excited I am about a study by what I allocate it to. If it gets research and focus, I'm super excited. This is something very, very important. So something like the EPI3 study I told you about at the beginning, the one on 8,500 people in France, this is the best real-world effectiveness study we have. So this got the RIF treatment, and that means we condense a massive body of very complicated work down to hopefully no more than 2 pages of A4. Sometimes we can't quite manage it, but that's our target, in easy to understand English without losing accuracy, which is the challenging part. And with the EPI3, I mean, that project generated about 8 different papers, I think, something like that. It was colossal. We felt it needed a table. I think you can't beat a table, love a table, so that we could really show the impact clinically, and we could also show the impact with the reduction of these drugs that were being prescribed. So research and focus articles, I hope you'll find useful. What we're doing more of now is synopses, much simpler, just about 500 or 600 word summary in plain English of a new study. People find those very useful. And of course, HRI statements are also important. If it's something controversial, we will usually put a statement on our website. We might not send it out if we don't want to draw attention to a negative story. So if you're wondering if we've said something about it, you'll find it on the website. Finally, research to go. This page hardly ever changes because this is, if we say, you know, someone's got a meeting, what research should I show somebody? I just say go to this page, because at any given time, this will be the things we think are most convincing, and that doesn't change very often. So the top one is a riff about the Matthew 2014 systematic review, the one with the 22 trials of individualized homeopathy, because that's our single strongest piece of evidence saying it works. Second is EPI3 again. So we can't talk about communications and assets without talking about social media. I have a love-hate relationship with social media, or I think actually these days more of a hate-hate relationship with social media. It's really not my thing, but Chris, communications manager, is 20 years younger, so he's far more interested in social media and reminds me constantly that if we want to reach a younger audience and if we want really to get homeopathy outside our echo chamber, we have to do social media and do it well. So I don't know whether you saw any of this output, but we changed strategy last year and I said, let's just really mix it up. I want to show the breadth of homeopathy research. So suddenly we've got turnip study from Ecuador, we've got penguins from Brazil, we've got red peppers, we've of course got clinical research from India and so on. And we do track the numbers, we do track the reach, and we are rather sad and we get very excited when we beat our previous targets. So I really appreciate it if you can help us do that in future. So just to sum up, so my first slide where I told you our position in 2009, the first two have not changed at all. But now we are being firm with a few more key messages. We are now saying that negative claims are based on misinformation or lack of knowledge of the evidence base. We're also starting to say that the level of evidence for homeopathy is similar to that of many conventional medical treatments. And the final one is unchanged. We do believe we still need more high quality research. I absolutely want to acknowledge the incredibly hard work of the amazing HRI team. Alexander Tournier, the founder, with his background in physics and maths. Esther, I've mentioned, with her background in epidemiology and AMR. Angelina Mosley, the one who destroys studies with me, which is great fun. She's a real all-rounder. Her day job originally as a professional researcher was in labs at UCL London doing cell biology and pathology, but now she can address most things. I come from another angle. So those three are all career researchers who then got interested in homeopathy and actually trained as homeopaths, but never practiced. I'm the other way around. I have a decent degree in biology, that's about it. Then did my whole career in homeopathy. So I bring that aspect to it. I make sure that the homeopathy is top notch, and between us, we can usually find the answers we're looking for. Of course, we don't just need researchers at HRI. Chris, I've mentioned, communications manager. The communications part of what we do is so colossal. So he does an amazing job entirely on his own. And Amy Hurlstone, I need to mention, who's taken over running our conferences since 2023. I'm also delighted to announce that we've just expanded. We are constantly overwhelmed. Sometimes I feel like I've had a tattoo on my forehead saying, Rachel, overwhelmed since 2012. That's what it feels like. I keep trying to get more help, and then we keep doing more. And I put out a call to our donors and said, really, really need more researchers. So we tried to recruit one junior researcher 3 days a week who we could start to train up and pass on all this expertise we've gained in the last 10 years to somebody new. And instead, we got a pair of Dutch newbies called Fleur and Armel, who are amazing Dutch researchers who presented themselves as a package, which was something different. They worked together all the time and said, would you consider us doing a job share? And they're amazing, only joined us since January, and we're already feeling the benefit of their expertise. So I get asked a lot, what can we do to help? Which is a lovely question to be asked. And I really would say what we would like most right now is to help us with impact. Please do sign up to our social media. Please do check in with our website. At the moment, we're almost always high up in the Google rankings. If you look for homeopathy research on Google, we're always near the top, but we want to stay there. And my feeling is we are basically in an information war. That's really what this is. And we can only do our best to put the best assets out there, but we are relying on the homeopathic community to give that voice impact. We really need your help to push through this narrative that's been around for so long, saying the wrong messages. So please help us if you can. Of course, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't mention the next HRI conference. And it's going to be in Thessaloniki. I don't know if you know, some of you know it. Or you just know Greece, you just see Greece, that's all you need to know, right? And the fact that my brother has lived in Thessaloniki for 25 years may have something to do with it. It's such a beautiful city, I loved it so much, and it means I have help on the ground. When you're organizing these events from overseas, it can be tricky, but when you've got your brother and sister-in-law, that really helps. And you can see from this image, if you don't know the city, it's beautiful. It's ancient, it's got all these ancient ruins, and it's right on the seafront. So our hotel is literally on the edge of that seafront. Our hotel, sorry. It's like I already own it. So I'm already excited about that event. And I just wanted to leave you with one last thought. When Angelina and I were doing that editorial, we started reminiscing, as you do. And I said, oh my God, I'd forgotten that it was 2011 when Alex first said to me, do you think we should do conferences? And I thought, Are you kidding me? We were tiny. We were nobody. We'd literally just started HRI. We had no money, hardly any networks. And I just thought, and he said to me, you know, he's working full-time at cancer research. He said, the homeopathy sector needs research conferences, not homeopathy conferences, research conferences, because that is the lifeblood of research. You have to get the researchers together. You have to get them talking to each other. That's where the magic happens. They need it. We must do it, he says. I was like, okay. So I thought I needed some serious advice. So I thought, who knows the most? So I went straight to Peter Fisher, who many of you will remember, the most important man ever in homeopathy research, and still is in my mind. I said, oh, Peter, hardly knew him. And I said, oh, what do you think about HRI doing conferences? And he looked at me and he loved HRI. He helped Alex get it off the ground, but he said, no. You know, and it's like completely crushed. I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, look, it's 2011. The attacks were terrible in the UK. Numbers were down. Numbers were down in students, practitioners. People were not going to conferences. It was really pretty difficult. So I knew what he meant. And he said, look, it's hard enough to get people to show up to homeopathy conferences right now. This is a niche within a niche. There is no way that you can do an event purely on research. What you need to do is a one-day event attached to somebody else's conference. I was like, okay. So I went back to Alex. He's like, what did Peter say? I said, Peter, he said no. We were both gutted. And we just had one of those moments where he said, well, what do you want to do? Should we follow his advice? And I said, look, I know it's a bit mad, but my gut feeling is on this one, he's wrong. My gut feeling is I trust what you're telling me about what the sector needs. And I think we just try. So we agreed that we would try and do our first conference. And we knew that if it failed, HRI would fail. It would all be over in a couple of years and we'd have completely flunked. But we agreed it was kind of go big or go home. So we took the risk and thank God it worked. And HRI Barcelona 2013 was a big success. And I do remember Peter coming up to me at the end and he just looked at me and smiled and said, well done, and then walked off. And it was like, that's all I got, but that's all I needed. So I was very, very grateful. And I told Angelina this story because she didn't know it. And she said, you've reminded me of this great quote by Amelia Earhart that I didn't know. Never interrupt someone doing what you said couldn't be done. And I know, I feel like, yes, that applies to some of the things that my team has done, that I'm so proud of them. But I also think, considering how many people still say homeopathy is impossible, that it also applies to everybody in this room and everybody doing homeopathy. Thank you.
Well, I hope you're all as excited as I was after I heard this full webinar last year. I'm so grateful and thankful that you all stayed with us throughout this webinar. And thank you so much again for the panelists that we have with us tonight. I'd like to start by introducing Ananda. Ananda Moore, she's a multifaceted force in the realm of healing, education, film, and health advocacy. She's recognized globally for her groundbreaking documentary, Magic Pills, which challenges mainstream misconception about homeopathic medicine. For nearly 13 years, Ananda was co-owner of Riverdale Homeopathy, a cherished hub for homeopathy in Canada, where Ananda curated a space dedicated to the dissemination of homeopathy. She currently runs Off-Grid, which is the name of her group, with Homeopathy, a portal for homeopathy learning that includes a free community and in-depth home prescriber courses. Ananda's influence resonates in various media outlets, including notable appearances on the Highwire with Del Bigtree, Brighton, Wise Tradition, Times, Inside the Story, and more. And I have had the privilege of meeting Ananda many times, including having her in Ottawa showing us her film and in many different seminars. Thank you so much, Ananda, for being here. I know you have traveled extensively to different places and your film was really amazing. So thank you for being here. And love to know what were your thoughts on watching this film and anything that's your experience can help us dissect the film, the webinar, and your own experiences in research.
Hey, Sharon, thank you so much. I have my screen up there, so I keep looking that way. But and that bio was written by an assistant a long time ago, so I find it a little flowery, but thank you for reading that one. Wow, this video feels like it's a summary of all the HRI conferences that I've attended over the years. And it's very, very complete in many ways. It's almost like hard to go, well, what do we say now? How do we follow up? And I understand now, we were chatting just before we started this, that this isn't the complete presentation. So the one area that I felt was lacking in Rachel's presentation was basic research. And maybe she avoided it because she didn't think it was as significant. But I think the basic research that we have in homeopathy, which is, it's over 1,000 good studies that we have, looking at cell lines, at plants, understanding, like looking at remedies with polar dyes under microscopes to understand, is there anything there? I think that's really significant research that wasn't covered in Rachel's presentation. You watched it live, Sharon? Was it there originally?
No, of course, she didn't have time to go through every single research. I'm curious about your own travels. You were somehow involved with leptospirosis research in Mexico, or filmed it.
Yeah, I wasn't personally involved. That would have been really cool. But it was one of the big themes in the film, and we looked at leptospirosis in Cuba, actually. And leptospirosis is a spirochete. It's a bacterial infection that is seen in a lot of tropical places around the world, and it's spread when there is a lot of flooding and water. And in Cuba, it was a real issue. And there's this not homeopathic, actually allopathic pharmaceutical company called the Finley Institute, who is the only pharmacy in the world that makes a human geared vaccine for leptospirosis. Everywhere else in the world, we vaccinate all our animals. You go to the vet, that's one of the standard vaccines your animals get, even if you've never heard of it. I promise it is something that is a concern. And in Cuba, they, like here where I live right now in Mexico, they are subject to hurricanes, and these hurricanes, when they come in, they definitely cause an increase in cases of leptospirosis. And it's deadly about 10% of the time, so it's quite a lethal infection. And it's hard to identify because it looks like dengue, it's very nonspecific, it can look like a lot of other illnesses as well. So in, I don't even remember the years anymore, it was so long ago, 2007, this terrible hurricane hit the coast of Cuba. And already before the hurricane hit, cases of leptospirosis were going up in that region. And they were very concerned about an epidemic coming. After the hurricane, cases started going up. And the Finley Institute didn't have enough vaccine to go around for the population in the region. And having recently been excited about the use of homeopathy in preventative medicine and to help with vaccine side effects in Brazil, they thought, why not? Let's try it. So they isolated the specific bacteria in that region that was spreading. They made a homeopathic remedy out of it, and a whole team went out, hurricane and all, like the disaster post-hurricane, to that area of Cuba and gave like 2.5 million doses, if I recall correctly. It's been a while, to the population there. The following year, they had hurricanes that hit the entire country. It was the worst year on record for Cuba for hurricanes. And so it was really cool because that one part of Cuba became the intervened area, and the other part became a control area because I had never received the homeoprophylaxis. So suddenly you had a control versus an intervened area. And what they found was astounding. In the rest of the country, with these new hurricanes and these new disasters, the cases of leptospirosis increased. I think it was around 30%, if I recall. And in the intervened area, the cases of leptospirosis had reduced by over 80%. So it was a very strong study in the end, and a real world case example of what can be done with homeopathy on a very mass level. I don't know. I'm not a researcher and a scientist at the level of Alex and Rachel. My cat is coming into the screen. Hi, sweetie. I don't know why they don't include that. Maybe there's a fear aspect of this is a very controversial area of study. We don't want to attract more negative attention. Homeopathy in the UK has really been demonized and has gone through a lot of transition, with homeopathy being taken off the NHS. The homeopathic hospital, the Royal London Homeopathic Hospital, having to change its name and the way it worked. So maybe that's a part of the reason it's not really talked about that widely. But yeah, that was one of the I just told you the whole story.
Thank you so much. Thank you
Yeah,
for
my
sharing
pleasure.
that. Yes, I do remember that part of it was in your film, The Magic Ball. So thank you for refreshing our memory of that research in Cuba.
And refreshing my memory. It's been a little while since I talked about it.
Very good. Thank you. We'll come back to you. So I'd like to introduce you to Heather Cardona. She's a homeopath and clinic director at Bio Natural Medicine in Winnipeg, Manitoba, offering an integrative approach grounded in natural medical sciences. Heather holds a Bachelor of Science from the University of Winnipeg, conferred in 2003, with a double major in biochemistry and chemistry. Her early academic focus on molecular systems and enzyme activity laid the foundation for her later personal studies in quantum biology and natural therapeutics. Following several years of biochemical research, Dr. Cardona completed a 4-year medical sciences program at the Manitoba College of Homeopathic Medicine, graduating in 2006 with the title of Doctor of Homeopathic Medical Sciences. Her clinical training encompasses homeopathy, botanical medicine, clinical nutrition, allergy testing, and nutraceutical support, with a special focus on pediatrics, digestive, and hormonal health, but also immune resilience and nervous system balance. So thank you so much, Heather, for being with us. She's also the president of Canadian Coalition for Homeopathic Medicine. So it's lovely to have you with us. Love to hear what was your take on watching this webinar, and what are the most important points for you, and anything else that you would like to share with the audience.
Thank you so much, Adam. Yes, it's a real pleasure to be with you all tonight. And yeah, watching it was really interesting for me because, of course, the discussion is about scientific research. It's about the numbers and the math. And for me, my response was quite emotional, actually, because I graduated, as a very wide-eyed, naive, idealistic person. In 2002 was when I started my education in homeopathy. And I was coming from this background in science. I was employed at the university as a researcher in a biochemistry laboratory. My name's on a number of published papers. And at that time, there was a little bit of controversy about homeopathy, but not really. even the CBC had done a few pieces about homeopathy that were curious, and so I really didn't know what was to come. And in listening to this presentation from Rachel, it kind of took us on that trajectory that really aligned with my career as both a student and as a homeopath, where I graduated and started my practice in 2006. And it really felt like that was the turning point, at least in Canada, from my perspective, where all of a sudden there seemed to be a real effort to demonize and discredit this type of medicine that I was just starting to get excited about practicing. And then, of course, the story with the research paper in Australia that did so much damage to homeopathic practice and our ability to educate and serve the public. And I really lived that whole experience, And so in having felt that and lived that, I feel like we're now at this threshold where we can look back, and even though the corrections are subdued and for the most part hidden from the public, we really have done a lot of work, as Rachel points out. There really has been this huge coalescing from these challenges that have been put forth for us, that have created this momentum for all of us, that has brought us to this point today, where we have these international conferences and people in every single continent across the world that are doing their due diligence. We're funding proper research. We're coalescing information that can push back against some of the gaslighting and unfair persecution of this beautiful and powerful medicine that has helped so many, not just people, but plants, animals, our ecosystem. And so I actually feel quite hopeful and proud of what we've all collectively endured. If you have, are a new homeopath, or if you've been part of that experience in the last 20 years, it felt like a real retrospective for me. And it feels like an end of one chapter, and it feels like an opening of a new chapter. And so I feel excited and hopeful and proud to have gone through what we've all been through. Yeah, that's how I felt.
Well, thank you so much, Heather, for sharing that. I do recall during that time between 2015 and 2018, where this attack on homeopathy was so strong that it actually divided families. I do remember a couple of people who were engaged to get married, and one of them strongly believed in homeopathy and the other one didn't. And that was almost a deal breaker for the person who didn't believe in homeopathy. That's how bad the attack was. And it is so nice to see somebody like Rachel putting all that together, and they were able to dig onto the original report and bringing it out and showing that that report is not at all what they intended to be. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. And let me introduce also Stephen. Dr. Malthouse has been practicing medicine in British Columbia for 45 years. He has practiced family medicine, palliative care, emergency medicine, and integrative medicine in both rural and urban settings, and has been involved in overseas research into childhood diseases. Stephen was the founding president of the Canadian Integrative Medicine Association and is currently a director of the Canada Health Alliance, a 5,000-member association of practitioners and public. Dr. Malthouse has been integrating homeopathy into his medical practice for more than 25 years. Thank you for being here, Dr. Malthouse.
My pleasure.
What is it like for a medical doctor to practicing homeopathy in this environment in Canada? What is your experience? What were your takes on that webinar, Rachel's talks? Oh,
I enjoyed it. I thought it was very comprehensive. I get it where Ananda, there were some things which the pursuit of trying to understand how homeopathy works has led us really down a lot of sort of rabbit holes. Not so much rabbit holes as more or less we put homeopathy under the microscope. So we've been examining how the molecules work and clusters of water and all sorts of different theories. And it just shows us there's so much we don't know about how things work. But I found it very comprehensive, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was actually one of the best I've seen in terms of explaining the research behind homeopathy to people. But the problem with homeopathy, I think, is that it deals with people as opposed to conditions. So when Rachel was talking about how, well, they only have, 1.8 to 2.8 studies per condition, that's understandable in homeopathy because we're trying to treat the whole person, and the condition or diagnostic label is just the start. It's like the ballpark, and then you have to individualize the treatment to a collection of symptoms or patterns that the patient will bring to you. So it's not surprising, but it does seem to compare pretty well to conventional medicine in terms of its the amount of research and the let's say success, or let's say positive research. Um, they have these sayings, things like, first of all, I don't think RCTs are right at the top of the pile, in my opinion. I think that what you see, and this is particularly true for doctors, is, doctors aren't really paying attention to RCTs so much. They say a randomized controlled trial is only good enough to, to show that you can bring a product to market. In other words, it's better than the 5% that could be caused by chance or placebo. So an RCT doesn't really show you that it's that useful in life and in practice, seeing patients. And then you get to a meta-analysis, which is a bunch of RCTs put together, and they have a saying that a meta-analysis is where good studies go to die, because they get lumped in with all the other ones, and then they get watered down, and then they come out and say, well, there's no evidence that it works. So there's sort of a problem with our research paradigm in the way that it measures good and bad research. That's my take on it. I think that practicality, is it really useful? Is it necessary? Because we have a lot of drugs in conventional medicine that are just, symptom relief. And sometimes, often we go way overboard for treating things that are they will treat themselves. You don't just have to give them a tincture of time. You don't have to start giving medicines and so forth. But anyway, I thought it was an excellent presentation. And the Jennifer Jacobs study, my wife Elizabeth and I, we were involved in that study in Nepal. We were the third one that did 120 some odd children, and it was challenging because we lived in Kathmandu, and there are very few road signs. And a lot of these kids were, living down a whole bunch of alleys, and you could never find them again if you looked. So we had to send we had to train up healthcare workers to actually go with the patients after they've been seen in our study, to go to follow them home and find out where they lived and mark it on a map, because otherwise they never would have followed them back. I think it just goes to show how difficult some of these studies are. We kind of gloss over it. It's just a bunch of numbers, and it either has a p-value of greater than 0.05 or not. But it's these studies take a lot of work, and money, I guess, is only part of it too. But personnel wise and diligence, and often you're going to some country. I can imagine it was like in trying to dish out leptospirosis nosode during a hurricane. You wouldn't really want that job. But that study does show how fantastically broad the effects of homeopathy could be. I remember sitting in a vineyard once, and they were going to destroy half the vines. They have to take out a whole section of vines because they had some kind of a fungus growth, and that's what they do because they don't want it to spread to the other ones. So with agro-homeopathy, just think of the amount of money and food and that you can save for people to eat and animals to eat and so on. So, and aqua homeopathy, that's a whole new idea. The idea of making fish farms healthy for the fish. Wouldn't that be wonderful? So homeopathy has such scope. It's unbelievable that we're just starting to, I think, to figure these things out. People using homeopathy in their gardens at home, right? I was just read something about dipping your your seeds in various solutions of homeopathy, and some of them grow more vigorously. I think they used silica was one of the 3 things that they used. Yeah. And I thought, oh, that's a good idea to make your garden grow better. So there's so many applications to homeopathy, and I think that that's part of the reason that homeopathy is targeted, because it is actually a paradigm which really, really works. And for that reason, it's kind of counter to the conventional approach, which is to suppress symptoms and make them invisible, and then declaring your patient cured and sending them on to the next specialist, right? So homeopathy has such tremendous potential. So things like this video with Rachel is fantastic for introducing people, and I think having some skepticism is a good idea. Because I can see that she's a skeptic, right? She's like, we're only going to look at the high quality stuff. And whereas some of us are a little bit kind of sloppy, and that we just kind of accept, we've seen it work and therefore it does work. Well, we might call that sloppy, but that's probably for us personally the best measure, the best evidence is when you actually see it with your own eyes, if you believe your own eyes. But anyway, I've really enjoyed it very much, and I'm curious as to what Heather and Ananda, what other comments they might have about this film. It was
Well, I would love to touch on some of the things you said, Stephen. And one is the importance of cases and what we
Yeah.
see in practice. And it's even acknowledged in conventional medicine. People do publish their different cases.
Mhm.
And the reason is so important is because it shows the real world efficacy of something. In a randomized controlled trial, you've got everything so controlled that it can become problematic. Because when you put things out in the real world, people are exposed to different kinds of diets, different emotional stressors. I had a friend, for example, who worked on a study looking at a specific antidepressant, and she found that it was really harmful in smokers. She was not allowed to publish her research, but because of that finding, and the university shut it down. But like those kinds of things aren't always are controlled for. And then when you go into the real world, suddenly these medications don't really work in the same way. So like case studies are incredibly important. Or like the leptospirosis study, where that was real life active example with no controls. So I think that's one of the weaknesses with us idolizing this idea of the randomized double-blind control study. The other thing you touched on was how homeopathy is so individualized. And so it's more difficult for us to fit into that paradigm. There are ways of shaping studies now that we've figured out in order to be able to do a double-blind placebo trial. For example, I really love what Heiner Fry did in his incredible work on ADHD, which is first they took the cases of all these children, they started providing the remedies, and they took the children that were actually responding to the remedies and put them in the randomized control trial. So there you know that the practitioner has come to a really good remedy. You know that the child is responding, and you've done that whole individualization process. And now you can like divide the group, blind it, and have kind of like a good foundation from which to start a study from. So we've come up with some really interesting solutions for that.
Some of the design, I agree, the designs have improved. When we did the one in Nepal, we had cases. We had like a case for all the different. I think we had 19 remedies to choose from, and then they were mixed in there randomly, so that we would just go if we decided it was a case of sulfur diarrhea, we would go and just take the next tube in line, and that way it was randomized, and we didn't really, and it was blinded, so we didn't know what they were getting. So I mean that was an evolution that was done quite a long time ago. And so things have really moved along, including Dr. Fry's work. It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. The highest level of evidence for a family doctor is is I'll just speak from my opinion of the highest level, is when someone talks to you in the hallway and tells you something. That's it, you don't, doctors don't read, I don't think, very often. And the other one is if they have something bad happen in their practice. So let's say they give an antibiotic and the person breaks out in a really bad rash, or they have some bad result, they'll never use that antibiotic again. So personal experience seems to trump most research, probably because it's affecting your subconscious as well.
Yes, for sure.
Unfortunately, our regulation is based on the research and the evidence base. And, I think doctors are really encouraged these days to only practice according to the evidence base, whatever that means,
I
assuming
don't
that
think that's true. I don't think
I'm,
that's true. I mean,
no,
we're
I've
talking about,
talked to some people in Toronto who that's been an issue for, but I'd love to hear your experience.
well, I think that we are given algorithms and to try to get doctors to follow the science, so to speak. But I'm not sure that that's really what happens. And then there's a question of whether the algorithms can be applied to the patient in front of you. It's not individualized. So there are some things happening now. Of course, out here in British Columbia, we have the Health Professional Occupations Act, which is trying to get healthcare practitioners, not just doctors, but dentists, physiotherapists, chiropractors, naturopaths, everybody to practice the same way, and that way is going to be dictated from on high. So it's not necessarily born out of experience, but from someone who, maybe wants you to use this particular type of drug. They themselves could have conflicts of interest, and maybe even stocks in Pfizer, who knows? But so that's what we're up against.
Yeah, it's so dangerous.
I think one of the wonderful things that came about from all these attacks from 2010, 11, all the way to 2016 was it really mobilized the homeopathic community around the world to get together, and HRI came out of that, and amazing works have been done. And there is a new reawakening of how important is homeopathy all over the world. So I think anytime homeopathic community is attacked, it comes out as stronger, united, and more quality informations and researchers come out. So in a way, we can, in some ways, be thankful that we're attacked, so we can go out and prove and show more and more that homeopathy is way beyond what people think it is. One thing that I find quite frustrating myself, and I wonder, Heather, whether I'm sure you probably feel the same thing. I often have patients who have seen the best specialists in town. They have been followed by their medical doctors, have been given the best conventional treatments that have been tested against placebo, and patients are doing okay. And then they come and do a homeopathic consultation. One or two remedies later, they do so much better. And they go back to their doctors, and the doctors say, and tell them how much the homeopathy has helped them. And they say, well, homeopathy is placebo, placebo works. Wonder, does anybody ever think that if placebo was going to work, why none of those drugs that are superior to placebo didn't work? And it's not until the person started taking homeopathy that worked. Do you have patients who have been told by their doctors that this is just placebo, even though conventional medicine has never been able to match what homeopathic remedies do?
Of course. And yeah, it's interesting when we talk about placebo, because in scientific research, we think of placebo as being a problem. And of course, placebo is a problem when we're talking about the efficacy of the type of medicine, right? But really, placebo in and of itself is the intrinsic nature of our bodies to self-repair, given a circumstance that is optimized. It's like a magical force that we should be quite curious about, actually. Like, what is that? How is that possible in every single possible type and severity of disease? And part of what I love about homeopathy is that we are infinitely curious about the nature of spontaneous self-repair. That's what we think about all of the time. And so I find patients are curious and interested in that. And ultimately, when it comes to, you know, who's done what with their conventional medical doctor or specialist, at the end of the day, I am an optimist and truly believe that we all just want that outcome for our patients. So irrespective of how and why all of the collating factors came together to have a positive health outcome, a medical doctor and I are both happy about that outcome when it does happen. But when it comes to the nuts and bolts of what's doing what, that's why HRI is so profoundly important, you know, because I'm not doing double-blind placebo randomized controlled trials. I'm treating human beings in front of me to the best of my ability and watching outcomes happen. And so I can never, in any given case, prove that it was not placebo because I'm just doing my individualized work. And that's why the work that we're doing in research is critically important, to be able to shift and speak truth to the power of those conversations, right? Yeah, I also want to say one thing. I loved what you said, Stephen, if I could respond to you about skepticism. I love that you actually framed it in a positive way. And I want to echo that because I do think that there's a huge difference between being skeptical, which I think can be very positive, and being cynical, which I think is what most people who call themselves skeptics of homeopathy are not skeptics at all. They are cynics. And there's a really huge difference between those two terms. Cynicism is full of doubt. Doubt at the outset, doubt in the middle, and doubt all the way through. It is full of bias. And that's what I see when a medical doctor, without actually done any kind of looking into the research of homeopathy, can just tell a patient, well, it must have been a coincidence or it must have been placebo. It couldn't possibly be true. It's cynicism, it's not skepticism. Skepticism is all about putting your own bias aside. And I actually think this is a really high quality that we should all be trying to attain. We all have our own bias, but if we can try to be brave enough to be able to look at information and have that undo our current understanding of something, that means that we are curious enough and open enough and humble enough to be real skeptics. And that's where learning happens. And so, yeah, I think that's a really important distinction.
Yeah, I
Thank you.
agree.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. If we could open the floor to questions from the audience, if anybody from the audience has any questions, any comments. Victor, I wonder if is it better if they use the question and answer session or the chat or open their mics and ask questions?
I find it hard anyone's going to have any questions after that video. It was so well done.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the Q&A section.
Someone, Robert Mello, put out something which is very interesting, which is the N=1 trials, which I think is very true. And it sounds to me like what Dr. Fry was doing in Switzerland with finding children that were already successfully treated. It was a little bit like that, and that he would probably, it sounds to me like he'd have some, would he put them into either a control group or the Verum group, and then he would alternate in a certain way to see what the effect would be. Is that how it worked, Ananda? I'm not sure that ADH trial, what that was.
Sorry, I was reading Roberto's message and missed your question a little bit.
I was just wondering, yeah, so they're very different ways of doing that. Mm-hmm.
So I think David Brule, is that the trial you're talking about?
No, I was talking about the Heiner Fry's trial, the ADHD trial. But I think we doing the N=1 trials all the time in practice, because often you give the wrong remedy and nothing happens. And the person come in all enthusiastic to you know, it's going to work, it's going to work. And then you give them the wrong remedy, nothing happens. And then they come in, and if you're lucky, you give them the right remedy, and then things start to change. So we do a lot of those.
Yeah, David Brule did a study, like an N of one, I think it was a series, treating the one patient at a time homeopathically, and it was I think still randomized and placebo controlled somehow, and sometimes the person would get Virum, and some visits the person would get placebo, and you could see the difference when the person receives placebo and they get the actual remedy, and that's just in one patient. So I think there's a lot of insight there, and they're very valuable.
Mhm.
I also had quite a few patients, maybe 4 or 5 different instances where the patients ask me, how do I know all this improvement that I'm having is not just a placebo, and is this from the remedy? And in almost all of them, I asked them if they were willing to participate in a one-person trial. So what I did is I provided them a number of placebo remedies. So in one instance, I gave 4 bottles of placebo, 1 homeopathic remedy, without them knowing which one is the placebo and which one is the remedy. In another instance, with a medical doctor who asked the same questions, how do I know my improvement of all my allergies is not due to placebo? I offered him to take 7 different bottles, 2 of them being the remedy and the other 5 being placebo, and take each one for a week and stop as soon as there is a reaction, wait for the reaction to go away, take it again, and come back. And I did that double blind. I didn't know which one are the remedies and which one are the placebo. My receptionist selected in which order they will go. And he came back after 3 months and he said bottle number 2 and 5 had effect and the other 5 had no effect at all on him. I invited my receptionist to come in and tell us which bottles were the Verum, which one were the placebo, and the 2 that he identified were the remedies. So it is possible to do individual trials also at this level. And I calculated the possibility of this being just a coincidence, and it is 1 out of 5,000. So it's a really highly unlikely that somebody can recognize 2 remedies out of 7 in a random order. So it is possible to do individualized studies as well. So if any of you ever have one person who is very curious about whether it is placebo or not, I think it can be done at an individualized level as well.
Very good.
Hiram, have you ever tried publishing it?
No, I haven't, but I have approached Rachel to see whether this is something possible. She said it is very unusual way of doing research. People are not going to pay attention. She's really looking at groups of 400, 500 people that we can do research. But I think from purely on a statistical perspective, if you can get 5 or 6 individuals who are able to identify 2 out of 7 or 2 out of 8, and you combine those together, then it is as good as gold as to prove that homeopathy is not placebo. It's not about treating a condition, it's just about proving that homeopathy is not placebo.
What if
It
we
also
did
has the advantage of being a
400?
good story. Do you know what I mean? Sorry, Ananda, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna make a funny comment around what if we did 400 N of 1 studies and put that together as one study.
You'd have to have a bunch of different practitioners. It's unlikely you're going to have 400 people that have a condition you're willing to kind of take a chance on reversing it or something, but or not having it proceed forward. Yeah, I think it makes a good story. I think that's why it's a sort of thing that would touch people's minds, hearts, because it's unlike research. I got the impression that Rachel really wants pure research. You know, the less human sort of, how would you say, human component in it, the better, you know, because it comes out statistically more provable from the perspective of, you know, greater than chance. But I think as a practitioner, we actually kind of like the human element in there, and that makes it for a more interesting story. And as I mentioned earlier, from the perspective of learning, sometimes a story is often better. It has a way of, in my opinion anyway, that it sticks with you because and it influences the way you go about practicing. So I think you should try to get it published. That would be good. Good story. I've never heard that before.
Yes, I will. I'm still I want to replicate this with 6 or 7 other individuals and do it really well and publish it and see what the community says about it.
But putting out the methodology that you used would also be useful for other people to try.
Yes.
So you may be able to make a collection and get to the 400 that Ananda says you have to meet the criteria for a high quality study.
Yes. Yeah. And I think there are 2 things we're facing. One is to prove that homeopathy is just not a placebo. I think that is very easy to do just by what I just mentioned. You can run a statistics on 2 out of 7 quite easily. And if you have 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 individuals who can repeat that experience, then that question is answered. Homeopathy is not placebo. Then the next question, whether medical conditions respond to homeopathy and which conditions respond. And that's the research. That's where the research is going. So I think there is room for a need for both of those methods to happen. I think one of the fastest way to prove that homeopathy is not placebo is to do these individual trials and use the statistical probabilities to show that this wasn't due to placebo response. It's definitely the homeopathic remedy working.
I think the evidence is already there that it's not placebo.
Yes, for
I think
sure.
we have that, but it's more to do with for individually for patients. But it is a new approach, like a new method for showing that it's not placebo. And it's very interesting because it comes from this inquiring the patients. They don't know whether it's just because you're a good doctor and for that reason you're really speaking to their innate healing ability much better than the pills do. So I think from that perspective, it's very enlightening. But from the perspective of showing that placebo, homeopathy, not placebo, I think that's already been shown.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Rachel says. She said, we don't need any more researchers to show that homeopathy is not placebo. For anybody who is not a cynic, we have the evidence.
Mhm.
Now we need to show in which areas homeopathy can be effective in animals, plants, and human beings. I think that's.
Yeah, I think, and some of these plant studies they look relatively simple to do. Stephen Baumgartner's studies with duckweed. I think he did it twice. And how simple is that? It's a lab, some arsenic, some arsenicum, and see how the plants grow. You don't need 400 patients. You don't need all this data. So I think agrohomeopathy is a great area for future research, and probably one that Bayer doesn't want to see happen, but could be very, very productive, I think.
Yes, of course. I think what we need to do as homeopaths is to maybe approach some of these departments of agricultures and universities because they don't know about these studies. Present it to them. They always have PhD students who are looking for subjects, and then ask them to get one of these studies done in their departments as a PhD thesis. I think as homeopathic community, we need to be a lot more proactive with the universities and the researchers.
Their trouble will be funding, though.
Yes, of course. Yeah,
when they
that's very true.
find out who's funding the universities, they may and what you're doing, they may have a little hiccup there.
That's very
Getting
true.
published.
Yeah.
Like students want to be able to get published, and there's such a publishing bias against homeopathy that it makes it difficult for their study material. When I was in Mumbai, Bombay Tech, with Jayesh Ballare, he was like, we used to be able to get published with our homeopathic trials, and now we can't. And so none of the students want to do any more homeopathic research because it won't get published and they can't get their degrees.
That's so true. I did approach a hospital, I'm not going to name it, talk to the head of the department, showed the videos of some of my patients that allowed me to use their videos to show how they have responded to a remedy for anxiety or depression or other mental conditions. And the head of the department was extremely excited about the results. And said that I'm going to put my whole research team in your hand. We're going to design the research. We're going to do it exactly as scientifically as possible. 4 or 5 months later, everything was in place. The only thing that was missing was funding. She said he couldn't find any funds anywhere for any homeopathic research. And that's such a big problem, unfortunately.
So maybe we need to call on some of our, I mean, maybe then it becomes biased research, but funding from the homeopathic pharmaceuticals. Some of the bigger ones do have some good sources of money. It'd be great to see them investing it. I don't know where else funding could come from.
Yeah.
These things.
Just one more challenge for us as homeopaths is, is finding the money for it. There's plenty of money for, sending overseas for military equipment and so forth. But when it comes to something like homeopathy, it's the purses get closed up.
I do love the plant studies, though. I love the research on plants because it takes all of the air out of the placebo problem with homeopathy, and it becomes very clear. And it's impossible to make a good argument against a well-done plant study. I hear what you said, though, Stephen, where human studies are more interesting, of course, but that's where it becomes much more complicated.
If you're hungry, the plant studies are pretty interesting.
Yeah, and so I think that that's really the area of research that we should be focusing on the most, so that we don't get into the weeds of the debate of the complexities of what goes on with any single disease state in any single human being. It's always multi-layered and complex, and you can't take the mental state and the emotional state out of the physical part of that. And that's where it gets, like the framework of the studies even gets confused. Explaining what an individualized medicine is still challenging, in the narrow box that we currently have when it comes to health studies. So yeah, I'm really excited about plant studies. I think that's such a smart way for us to keep going.
So I see Kathleen posted the Samueli Foundation. And maybe Kathleen, you can correct me and things have changed, but when they're excited and supportive of homeopathy as a family, but things got a little too hot for them when they started funding homeopathic research. Roberta says not anymore. So things have, that's great to know. So Samueli found, or are you saying the opposite, Roberto? I don't know where our conversation's going here. Either
do they support or do they not support anymore?
do they not? Yeah. Not. No. Yeah, that's where I was heading. They're not supporting anymore. It got too heated for them and too controversial, so they've stopped supporting.
We do have one question in the chat regarding how we can prove the efficacy of homeopathy in treating psychological diseases, or that is to say in psychiatry. And I mean, one thing to note is that there is a book that was recently published by Jerry Cantor called Sane Asylums, The Success of Homeopathy Before Psychiatry Lost Its Mind. And this is quite an interesting historical documentation of homeopathic psychiatric institutions between the period of about 1870 to 1930. So we do have a lot of historical data for anyone that is interested in looking at that. But the question is, given the scientific standards of today, how can we go about assessing the efficacy of homeopathic psychiatry?
Well, I'll start off by just saying that every patient you see is a psychiatric patient, because you always take their mental, emotional state included in your assessment of them and your choice of treatments. So, I mean, I had someone once who had grown some marijuana in his backyard and decided to eat it because it wasn't working well when he smoked it, and he developed an anxiety disorder, which he had for a couple of years. And then when the remedy I chose from actually was homeopathic cannabis, a remedy in homeopathy made from that. And within a week, his symptoms went away completely. And this was a very healthy guy with a job, you know, married with a couple of children. And, you know, he was very stable, had no history of anxiety before. But I'm sure that everybody who practices homeopathy has plenty of cases.
Yes, I think the most beautiful thing on individual cases is all these patients who are already taking an antidepressant or antipsychotic medicine when they come for a
Some.
consultation. No, for those I'm talking about patients I've seen who are already on medication when they come for a homeopathic consultation. I don't change their medication, treat them homeopathically, and it's really amazing to see that within few months they said that the remedy worked better than anything they ever took in the past. That means those drugs that are far better than placebo do not come any close to what homeopathy can do for those patients, which shows that homeopathy not only is better than placebo, but it's better than these pharmaceutical drugs as well.
And if you think about the power of placebo that's behind giving a conventional drug, you go into the doctor, they're wearing their white coat, you have to wait, you put your appointment on the altar of your mantelpiece, waiting for your appointment with the higher up, you know, and then eventually you get your appointment and you go in there and, you know, you've got this person comes in with a white coat on, all this sort of the clerical garb, and then they give you a pill for your ill, then you know, that has a tremendous suggestion component to it, right? And if you don't get better from that, but you get better from someone that gives you a couple of little white pills to stick in your mouth, you kind of think that how is it possible that the first placebo didn't work when the second one did?
Well, I think we went a bit beyond the time that we expected, but it was a wonderful discussion. Thank you, every one of you, for being here. Thank you, Victor, for hosting tonight as well. Wonder if there's any last words that anybody would like to share with the audience. If not, we can pass on to Victor to close the session.
Take it away, Victor.
Okay. All right. So thanks again, everyone, for being here with us. And as mentioned previously, we have a number of exciting webinars still to come for this year. They're all listed here. And again, please do stay up to date with the coalition. And I'll put the website up on the screen here, homeopathycoalition.ca. And you can subscribe to our newsletter, check the social media pages, and we hope to see you at our next presentation.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. It was such a wonderful opportunity for all of us to share another moment with our audience. And thank you for everyone who participated tonight.
Thank you. That was a lot of
Good night.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.